Buonasera a tutti e benvenuti a questo colloquio. Io sono padre Stefan Tertunte, religioso deoniano e quindi sacerdote del Sacro Cuore di Gesù e il direttore del centro studi deoniani della nostra congregazione qui a Roma. Il colloquio che stiamo per iniziare è il frutto di una collaborazione piuttosto inusuale, e cioè da un lato la congregazione dei sacerdoti del Sacro Cuore di Gesù e dall'altro lato l'Università Pedagogica di Lucerna in Svizzera. Questa inusuale collaborazione si rispecchia anche nel programma del colloquio. Do quindi un cordiale benvenuto alla professoressa Franziska come rappresentante dell'Università Pedagogica di Lucerna in Svizzera e un altrettanto caro saluto al Superiore Generale della Congregazione dei Sacerdoti del Sacro Cuore di Gesù, Padre Carlos Luis Suarez Cordoniu. Ci sono diverse istituzioni che sostengono, come evidenziato nel foglietto, questo colloquio internazionale. Saluto il vice-rettore della Sacred Heart Seminary and School of Theology di Helskonas negli Stati Uniti, Padre Zbigniew Morawiec. Eccolo. Un caro saluto anche ai professori José María Villanueva e Anacleto Iglesias Triguero, che rappresentano la Business and Marketing School ESSEC in Spagna. Ecco. Appena arrivati. Sì, li abbiamo già visti. Per il centro editoriale deoniano saluto il superiore provinciale dell'Italia settentrionale dei deoniani, il padre Enzo Brena. Si fa vedere? Eccolo.
I switch to English in my introductory words. This transdisciplinary conference with contributions by historians, religious scientists, church historians, systematic theologians, art historians, and philosophers is the central part of a cooperation project between our two institutions, including colleagues also from the University of Fribourg in Switzerland and the University of Freiburg in Breisgau in Germany. Elke Paud sitting beside me, and of course also David Neuhold in Switzerland, as well as two scientific collaborators whom I would like to mention here as well, Sven Bayer and Damian Troxler. The project merges memory studies and cultural history of religion, theology and history of art, and the analysis of devotional discourses and practices as central mechanisms of religious communication. Stefan Tertunte, Elke Paute-Mortange, and I presented reflections on the topic at the International Conference of the European Academy of Religion in Bologna this year, and these contributions will be published in the Schweizerische Zeitschrift für Religions- und Kulturgeschichte, the Swiss Journal of Religious and Cultural History, in about a month's time. Poursuivant une approche qui focalise sur des narratifs et discours, sur l'iconographie et des rituels, leur longue continuité, leurs adaptations, transferts, par exemple dans le contexte missionnaire, ainsi que leur transformation et même des déconstructions radicales dans la longue durée jusqu'au temps présent, la dévotion au Sacré-Cœur peut être étudiée de manière innovatrice. Les axes centraux de la conférence transdisciplinaire modèlent, pour ainsi dire, aussi sa structure. Une première partie centre la focale sur les dimensions de la mémoire, du corps et de l'émotion. Ces trois axes, qui seront aussi reflétés du point de vue théorique et méthodologique, crée l'encadrement des deux parties subséquentes. Les contributions de la deuxième partie, commençant cet après-midi encore, poursuivent des perspectives d'histoire culturelle, sociale et de l'art sur des transformations et transferts culturels de la dévotion au Sacré-Cœur, dans la longue durée surtout. Les réflexions théologiques et philosophiques de la troisième partie de demain après-midi abordent les dimensions de mémoire et d'expérience de la corporalité, de spiritualité et d'émotion de manière dynamique et entrecroisée. The conference aims at generating innovative insights, not least through its highly transdisciplinary perspective and its conceptual and methodological reflections. It will particularly be benefiting from continuative discussions to which we are all looking forward very much. Thank you for being here and thank you for your contributions in our discussion sections.
Entriamo dunque nel vivo dei nostri lavori, in questo esercizio di ascolto, di riflessione, di dialogo. I 4 relatrici e relatori che seguono condividono con noi, o le 3, sono ormai diventati 3 relatori e relatrici, che seguono condividono con noi le loro riflessioni sotto il titolo Memoria, Corpo ed Emozione, come abbiamo sentito. Abbiamo chiesto a ciascuno degli intervenenti di questo colloquio di limitarsi a una relazione di 25 minuti. Questo può sembrare poco, e lo è, ma come vedete dal programma abbiamo previsto uno spazio più ampio per la discussione, dove sarà l'occasione in dialogo con l'Assemblea di aggiungere, di approfondire qualche elemento delle relazioni. Vi presento dunque la prima relatrice di questo colloquio, la professoressa Franziska Metzger. Insegna la storia presso l'Università Pedagogica di Lucerna in Svizzera e svolge i suoi lavori di ricerca nell'Istituto per la didattica della storia e le culture di memoria. Si colloca nell'ambito della storia culturale con una particolare attenzione per i processi di trasformazione religiosa dopo il tardo Settecento. Molte delle sue pubblicazioni parlano di memoria, soprattutto a livello concettuale, quali sono i modi, le condizioni, gli elementi processuali di memoria. Dirige una collana con il titolo Spazi di memoria, storia, letteratura, arte. È anche la direttrice della rivista svizzera di storia religiosa e culturale. Il titolo della sua relazione oggi è Memoria del Sacro Cuore, dimensioni linguistiche, iconografiche e rituali. Parlerà in inglese.
Grazie Stefan per la tua introduzione. Penso che la PowerPoint viene automaticamente sullo schermo. These 2 images of the Sacred Heart, a procession banner from Tyrol dated around 1800 and a devotional image of the late 19th century, both used as ritual objects, can productively be analyzed with regard to the category of memory. Serial iconographic reproduction in a long-term perspective, ritualization, materiality and sensual tangibility, which the 2 objects and the history of their usage demonstrate, are central mechanisms of religious memory. Iconography and closely linked to it practices of seeing and of demonstrating, as in the examples by angels and by Christ himself, as well as, if you think of the procession banner, of course, of those who are demonstrating this banner itself. These are all central modes in the practice of devotional memory. Moreover, the two examples represent the close entanglement of the visual, ritual, and narrative dimensions of memory. Against the background of a threefold understanding of the relation of religion and memory, which I will introduce to you at the beginning of my talk, the focus of this contribution lies on the iconographic, ritual, and narrative dimensions of the Sacred Heart. I thereby combine a long-term perspective on continuities with one on discontinuities and ruptures of codes. My conceptual reflections build on the thesis that the complex relation of religion and memory is an essential mechanism of religious communication. Mechanisms of memory are central for the modeling and stabilization of religious language, of ritual practices, and of the formation and fostering of religious communities. In accordance with constructivist, post-structuralist approaches in memory studies, I conceptualize memory as a space of selection, not unlike Jacques Derrida's and Michel Foucault's notion of archive, and approaches to memory by representatives of system theory as fundamentally the result of processes of construction. The focus lies on the dynamics of memory, on the complex texture of codes and modes of interpretation, of ritual and narrative use. Based on my previous research and conceptualization in the field of memory and religion, I define three modes of religious memory, which you can also find on the handout. First, linguistic and iconographic visual codes as space of memory. Second, ritual and ritualized practices as memory. And third, narrative memory, the construction of memory through narratives, and more specifically, narratives of memory. In a communication theoretical approach linking semiotic and discourse analytical methodology, I regard discourses and symbolic and ritual practices as something which is entirely entangled, an approach that deconstructs dichotomous notions of discourse versus practice, language versus image, rites versus language, language versus emotion. In and through all these three modes, which I delineated very shortly, but especially through the first two, the linguistic and visual code thing, and the second one, the ritual practices, memory of the Sacred Heart is created, and Sacred Heart devotion is modeled as memory. Images, narratives, and ritual practices of the Sacred Heart both create spaces of memory and are created, painted, narrated, and ritually used spaces of memory. I will demonstrate this in the following systematization. Linguistic and iconographic religious codes, the first dimension, in a way build the framework for the two other dimensions, the ritual and the narrative dimension. Let me focus for a few minutes on all three dimensions now. Multi-layered textures of memory originate in the codification and reproduction of semantics, of images and narratives, decodable in a religious community. With regard to visual codes that are essential for the Sacred Heart, iconography and forms of seeing are intrinsically bound together. What the viewer sees and how he sees it is marked by the respective community. The Sacred Heart in all its iconographic variations, with thorns, with blood, beaming, as an emblem, integrating text in the case of Alacoque's image, lifted out of Christ's body as in Pompeo Batoni's painting, integrated in Christ's chest as in many devotional images of the 19th and 20th century, or in relation with another holy figure, most commonly Mary, such as, for example, in Maurice Denis' painting Sacré-Cœur Crucifié from 1916. All these variations can be interpreted as complex icon asserting the living presence and of sanctity in paintings, serial prints, and ritual objects alike. In these icon variations of the complex relationship of the bodily and the symbolic dimension of the Sacred Heart become visible, sometimes closer to a synecdoche, one could say, as pars pro toto, sometimes more in a metaphoric sense, as a figurative heart. In fact, visualization enables the simultaneity of corporality and its symbolic transcendence, the simultaneity of demonstrating the visceral dimension of the essence of Christ's corporality and its sacralized transformation. With Stephen Jaeger, who nota bene has worked on other icons, we could in certain cases speak of a hypermimesis with regard to the iconography of the Sacred Heart, inasmuch as by establishing the extraordinary of Christ's physiognomy, it goes to the boundaries of the human and beyond reality to the sublime, magnifying humanity into divinity. This is not only the case in devotional images, such as the two of them, or also the painting you saw before, but also in art, especially in symbolist paintings, such as by Georges Devalier, for example, and Joseph Mayhofer in the early 20th century. I'll show you a few examples here. Devalier's symbolism works through inner-worldly social action. In his painting from 1905, Christ, in agony for the world, forcefully opens his flesh in order to lay bare his heart. In Le Drapeau du Sacré-Cœur, the second painting, he raises his heart and puts it on the white of the tricolore banner, a gesture that in a way cites Eugène Delacroix's La liberté guidant les peuples. Mayhofer's symbolism, on the other hand, is the symbolism of Art Deco. As much as Christ is pointing at his heart, the painter is pointing at the beauty of his work of art, an entanglement of the symbolism of beauty and that of all-embracing and adorned goodness. The sublimity of Christ is produced through sublime art. Let me come to the second part, still in the linguistic and iconographic dimension. The usage of codes and their interrelation as textures of memory is significantly marked by intertextuality. Inasmuch as new iconographic elements and transformed meanings are integrated and appropriated, both in the Catholic community and beyond, in contexts beyond the Catholic sphere of communication. Also for this, the Sacred Heart is an excellent example, inasmuch as the growing polyvalence of the icon enables its re-imaging and reimagining, its rewriting and transformation. Two examples shall demonstrate this. In Odilon Redon's well-known Sacred Heart painting, the figure of Christ, with a radically transformed face compared to the serially reproduced memory of Christ's portrait, neither reveals his heart nor does this introspective Christ gaze at the believer. The heart, which is only slightly hinted at, is an invisible space and reverses the mechanism of making the invisible visible. In this painting, the icon is not present anymore. What remains is the symbolism of the Sacred Heart that does without icon, the signified with only an allusion of the signifier. A second example, to which other speakers will probably return, tattoos of the Sacred Heart. As one can find thousands in a short Google search, both within a Catholic discourse community and in a plurality of syncretistic transformations, frequently present variations of the icon of the heart without the figure of Christ, kind of similar to Alacoque's emblem, or as part of a montage with other religious or not religious icons are present and can be detected. Iconographic bodily spaces, tattoos on the body, thus become highly intertextual and at the same time highly idiosyncratic, one could say, embodiments of memory. Let me come to the third point under linguistic and iconographic memory. Radical questioning and deconstruction of codes of religious languages, and iconography, and their ironic citation create a complex self-reflexive relation to instances of religious memory. Deconstruction and ironic reintroduction of the icon of the Sacred Heart can be analyzed in modern and contemporary art, as the following examples shall show. Salvador Dali's The Sacred Heart of Jesus from 1962 exposes the seriality of Sacred Heart iconography. The card that the figure of Christ, resembling a pop singer maybe, is holding like a devotional image is strikingly displayed as article of daily use and mass production. Christ's gesture of showing is uncovered, ironized, and deconstructed in an effect of alienation by a Christ who no longer identifies with the heart he displays. The heart on the card is decorporalized, whereas Christ is exclusively body, bringing to expression what the right has turned the icon into. The icon, though transformed, is still recognizable, but has lost its meaning. Dali's surrealism in this painting comes close to a reflection on pop art, one could say. Also in pop art, we find transformed uses of the Sacred Heart, in which defamiliarization of meaning in a free-floating icon becomes even more obvious, be it in Jack Kerouac's bodily heart dominated and outshone by another part of the body, or in Jeff Koons' gigantic kitsch heart exposed on the roof of the Metropolitan Museum in New York in 2008. In Damien Hirst's Sacred Heart sculptures, again, expression of the seriality of the Sacred Heart, with variations in the title, but still resembling the Sacred Heart iconography. We can see again a radical ironic alienation, citing central narratives and exposing them, doubly even in a mise en abîme, in containers filled with formaldehyde. Let me come to, after Hirst, to the second dimension, the ritual one. The linguistic and iconographic dimensions of religious memory in general, and specifically of that of the Sacred Heart, can only be thoroughly analyzed if looked at in its close relation to ritual and ritualized practices on various levels. On the level of the veneration and commemoration, Maurice Denis' painting, where you find Christ and Mary, shows us a relation which is very closely linked to the dimension of veneration, bringing, of course, these two together in a spiritual community. Or as a second dimension, I would mention the dimension of performance as very essential to ritual memory. With Thomas Macho, religious rites can be conceptualized as techniques of memory that make the invisible visible and sensually experienceable. A relation to transcendence is created persuasively through repetition and thus through memorial reproduction. Dali's painting, I think, reflects not least on this dimension. Further on, memory is also created through materiality, including sacred, sacralized objects, monuments, and so forth. Sacred objects, images, and bodies can be conceptualized as lieux de mémoire, created through their materiality, producing at the same time sensuous and material routines as memory. This systematization in its shortness, due to the short talk, the short time I have, this systematization is based on a position that regards a number of often closely intertwined practices as paramount. The dimension of demonstrating and showing, that of seeing and interpreting, that of narrating and listening, interpreting, and that of complex embodiment, or maybe in the plural of embodiments, the interplay of bodies, of Christ, the body of Christ, and the viewer, the devotee, but also of the community of devotees. seeing and bodies stand in a complex relationship in the enactment of devotional memory of the Sacred Heart, be it in paintings, devotional images, or other objects. The body of the viewer, David Morgan, uses the term of embodied I, and the icon as embodiment, the embodied I in David Morgan's terms, are both marked by gazes and by the entanglement of these gazes. A very important and interesting point, which also again kind of brings you the intertwinedness of the linguistic, the ritual, and also the narrative dimension into the center. Let me very shortly turn to the narrative dimension. Narrative memory, the construction of memory through narratives consisting of, now I was a bit too far, sorry for that. Narrative memory in the construction of memory through narratives consisting of layers of discourses and images, and in a narrow sense, narratives of memory can be considered as a third mode of the relationship of religion and memory. Central discourses forming the meaning of the Sacred Heart, such as the discourse of sacrifice and atonement, of love, of mercifulness, of sympathy, all linked to moral discourses, their transmission and their mediation were not least narratively produced and created narrative memory. We therefore can speak of a narrative stabilization of Sacred Heart memory through references to the Bible, to other texts, to encyclicals, for example, established by those propagating the devotion, through pastoral and didactic narration, as well as through spiritual texts, as expressions of individual experience. All these can be described as practices of narrative memory. Let us return to Sacred Heart iconography. For an example, in contrast to paintings of Christ in a biblical environment, as we find them very often in the 19th century especially, Sacred Heart images, for their part, did do rarely narratively stage memory, as mostly they lack a visually produced dimension of narrativity. Rather, the heart of Christ became the symbol of central discourses of memory, especially in images of mass production in the 19th and 20th centuries, as I showed them to you, which were fostered by more narrative modes of commemoration, pastoral, didactic, etc. We might find exceptions, of course, where the figure of Christ is transposed into a concrete historical or contemporary context, such as in the examples I showed you by De Vallière during and shortly after the First World War, especially Le Drapeau du Sacré-Cœur, which is highly political, of course, where the temporal link makes certain implied narratives tangible, if not as a coherent narrative, yet as a narrative trigger. And maybe Dali's Christ in a dynamic narrative gesture seems to show what the Sacred Heart once was, once had been, and what he turned it into. In my communication theoretical perspective, I focus not least on the functioning of codes, on discourses and practices of religious memory and the way they are constructed. Based on my previous research, a number of mechanisms in the dynamics of religion and memory in general and regarding the Sacred Heart in particular seem to be especially important. Let me very shortly systematize. You have this systematization on the second part of your handout. A few of these mechanisms are kind of repetitive to what I already explained. Some of them seem to be interesting for the conclusion of my talk and also for giving the word to other speakers. So a first dimension I would like to mention, I just click through it in order to be a bit faster, would be that of detemporalization. Detemporalization is a central mechanism of religious and non-religious memory alike. It is created through the construction of continuity, repetition, etc. We found that in the examples I showed you on the iconography of Sacred Heart. Second, also through the construction of eternity, linking past, future, and eternity, bound together in a teleological perspective. In Sacred Heart iconography from the 18th to the 20th century, even to the present, the providential dimension is visually made present in the lack of historical specificity and intensified through the important mechanism of repetition and seriality, foreshadowing future eternity, eternal seeing and vision. Eternalization through art is not least staged, and I have him here once more in Mayhofer's painting. Christ's eternally static pointing at the heart should not only eternally strike the angel behind Christ with awe, but every observer now and in the future. To come back to the slides, different times we're still in the detemporalization dimension, different times are synchronized, creating simultaneity of the non-simultaneous. Simultaneity regards the devotee and the eternal figure of Christ as well as an implied communion of past, present, and future believers. The second point you can find under B in the red field, the creation of presence, both temporally and spatially, or in Hans-Georg Söffner's words, appresentation is a second important mechanism to make Christ present, the presence as an enactment, a mise en scène of Christ's bodily presence or his symbolic transcendence of the bodily dimension. In a way, modern, especially contemporary art, often deconstructs this mise en scène of the transcendent, showing it, even ironizing it. As a third point, closely linked to making present, is the visibilization of the invisible. I think that was quite visible in my image as I presented, to make visible the not visible, the transcendent, other, the icon making it possible to become the object as representative of the non-visible, making visible as a very dynamic dimension in the construction of religious memory in general, but I think of the Sacred Heart in particular. And the last dimension would be the one I centered on not so much so far, the dimension of space, the creation of sacred space through memory. Religious objects, images, bodies of saints, bodies of Christ, shaped spaces, natural spaces, paths of pilgrimage, processions in the public sphere, but in a more abstract sense, also narrative spaces are turned into sacralized spaces through the dimension of memory. Sacralized spaces can be conceptualized as heterotopia in Foucault's conception, as real but utterly different spaces, as I cite Foucault, contestation à la fois mystique et réelle, de l'espace où nous vivons. Inasmuch as they link immanence and transcendence, the past, present, and future, creating eternity through memory. In space, unfolded by an image, the spatial dimension of the heart and of Christ's body as the essence of sacredness, and the space of connection created by the intersection of gazes, one could say again with David Morgan, between Christ and the devotee are heterotopic spaces, transcending immanence within the immanent. Tattoos, maybe, too, if only for the tattooed individual, transform the body into a heterotopia. Let me shortly look once more, without slides though, at the examples of modern and contemporary art. In Dali's and Hirst's works of art, and if you want also in Kuhn's art, inasmuch as it exposes an idyllic children's world on the rooftop of a museum, yet another heterotopia in Foucault's understanding. Heterotopia is exposed and ironized as created, manipulated, and commercialized by humans. Let me conclude with a few words opening up the scene, one could say, to the next few speakers. More pronouncedly in Sacred Heart devotion than in other devotions, repetition and seriality foster the mechanism of memory delineated above in all its figurations and variations. Memorial reproduction conveys stability to the icon, with long continuities in visual and narrative expression, which include adaptations, variations, and radical transformations alike, up to the point of deconstruction. Thank you for your attention.
Grazie Franziska per questa introduzione nell'universo della memoria applicata al Sacro Cuore, nelle diverse dimensioni del funzionamento di memoria per quanto riguarda il Sacro Cuore, e ci saranno domande da fare e lo faremo nella discussione sopra dopo.